Welcome everyone to the second leadership journey session of our October 2022 Global Leadership Lab immersion on the theme Developing Self. We have people from all over the world joining us on Zoom, YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. My name is Brighton. I am an Atlas Call Fellow from Zimbabwe, serving with the American Red Cross. And I'm very excited to be today's session moderator and have the pleasure of speaking with our incredible guest. Before we begin, would like to remind you that Atlas Core team will be monitoring on each of the platforms, so make sure to ask our speaker questions. We'll get back to audience questions in the second half of today's event. So just to warm us all up a little bit, here is an icebreaker question for everyone. What is the first thing that comes to mind when you think of developing self? What is the first thing that comes to mind when you think of developing self? While you write your answers in the comment section, let me introduce today's guest. So Raj Kumar is the founding president and editor-in-chief at Devex, the media platforms for the global development community. He is a media leader and former humanitarian council chair for the World Economic Forum and a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. His work has led him to more than 50 countries where he has had the honor to meet many of the aid workers and development professionals who make up the Devex community. He is the author of the book, The Business of the Changing World, and a go-to primer on ideas, people, and technology, and technology disrupting the aid industry. You should definitely check it out. Looking forward to getting life-changing insights and nuggets on personal branding and social change and how social change leaders can leverage personal branding to grow their business and expand their network. Welcome, Raj, to the session.
Really nice to be with you, Brighton, and to be with everyone at Atlas Core. It's a real pleasure to have seen Atlas Core grow over the years, and I've had the honor to come and speak with you and many of your fellows over time, and it's been great. Really happy to be with you again.
Thank you so much. So while waiting for responses from our participants from all over the world, we'll just dive in. So what is the first thing that comes to mind when you think of developing self? Right.
You asked of developing self to me. Yeah, I guess part of it, I think about how people often don't change much. They don't develop much, that you can see the spark of what someone is passionate about or their personality from such a young age and how that plays out over their life. And so to me, I guess one of the first things is just thinking about understanding yourself first, right? And knowing, like, what is it that moves you? What are you passionate about? What drives you? What mission in life, is really attractive to you? I think that's sort of first, in order to then begin thinking about how do you develop yourself? How do you build, we often get very, especially people who are ambitious, like this group of fellows, get right into things like, what technical skills do I need? And of course, those skills are important, no doubt. You need technical skills, but I think finding the purpose first, the thing you're chasing after to try to make a real difference in the world, that's kind of the first thing. So maybe it's discovering self and then it's developing self. That's the way I would think about it.
Yeah, really interesting nuggets there. As I see in the chats, I see that there's issues of openness to feedback, emotional intelligence, and self-awareness and self-criticism. So a lot of views there on developing self. So as we get started, Raj, how has your childhood growing up in India impacted the person that you are today?
Yeah, I guess it gets a lot to my first point because I had this great opportunity where I was born in the United States in New Jersey, and raised there, but I got to spend a lot of time in India. I would travel to India. I had a lot of relatives and family in Kerala in South India. And so I'd go almost every year as I was a kid growing up. And that was a huge influence on me and on my sister, my older sister. We both really got this idea that, wow, the world is very unequal. Kids the same age in different places have really different experiences and opportunities. And the kids, I would play on the soccer field with the kids in the village where we would live in India. And I was the only kid with sneakers, right? Every other kid was barefoot. And that kind of thing sticks in your head. And so I think my sister and I both got this sense like, boy, there is something wrong in the world in terms of social justice and equality. And that's an issue that needs to be worked on. And at the same time, I was very fortunate that I had an aunt and an uncle who were development scholars. And they were writing books and doing research and thinking about these very issues of global development. They were professors in India and then in other parts of the world, and they were studying things like the dairy cooperative movement in India. And so they would take me and my sister on village visits. They would talk to us, and we got to see, a dairy and talk to some of the people who work in these dairies. And we really got some influence as a young kid around what is this concept of global development, and that there is this global movement, this industry even, that's designed to try to alleviate poverty and to empower people and maybe to really change the world. And that's kind of what I think really influenced myself to want to do something in this field. And ultimately probably what sparked me to want to work in something like Devex and get it started.
Thank you, Raj. Now I see the great foundation you have to actually be leading in the way that you're working right now. And that also leads me to the focus of this week's session at Atlas Core. So during orientation week, Atlas Core fellows discuss the who, what, and why of social change leadership. And what is your personal why? That is what inspires you to do the work you do. And do you think it has changed over time?
I think it's just gotten a little bit deeper maybe over time. A big part of the why is what I mentioned. It's getting to, see up close and personal the challenges and the injustices in the world. And even, within my own family or my wife's family, seeing some of the ways that life plays out very differently depending on your opportunities, especially around kids. That's very motivating. I think in terms of like what to do about it, the why, where you focus that why, for me, from the beginning at Devex, it was around what our slogan really is, which is do good, do it well. So it was this idea that, look, there's lots of people with good intentions trying to do good things in the world. There's an entire industry. It's now a $200 billion plus industry annually designed to try to do good things in the world. We're all in that field in some way. The funding that we're all getting in some way is part of that larger industry. And boy, that is a precious resource. And we've got to make it go further. We've got to do more with it. And I think if you ask that question, why is the global development industry not as effective as it could be? Why is it that still lots of the funding ends up flowing back to the richest parts of the world? And why is it that local organizations, national NGOs, et cetera, are not empowered as much? They don't get much of those questions. I think those why questions are really critical if we want to keep driving our work forward. And that's really our ethos at Devex is, as journalists, especially asking, why is it like this? And that's a lot of what drives me. And I think that's what drove me to co-found Devex 22 years ago now, and still drives me. I still find every day when we're out there looking at how the sector works, examples where you think, is this really how it works? We really haven't gotten past this. We're still talking the same conversation and we haven't broken through. So I just think that it's important to have that idea of why and to keep asking the question.
Great, right there. So as you have had, keep asking yourself the question why, and also do good and do it well. A very important phrase right there. So you co-founded Devex as a graduate student at Harvard 2 decades ago. Can you tell us a bit more about the journey?
Yeah, it started like probably a lot of young people at the time. You have an advantage in a way when you don't know too much. So I just knew just enough about global development and how it worked to think, oh, there's a need for something like Devex. There's a need for an online community, for a news platform, for a jobs platform, for a funding platform. We can get all this information together and really democratize the development sector. I knew just enough to think that was important and needed, but fortunately, I didn't know enough to know how hard it would be and how much there would be resistance to the very idea that really we had to bring these tools of data and transparency and journalism to bear in the development sector. And a little bit of that ignorance is healthy sometimes when you're an entrepreneur and you're trying to start something. And so, thinking back, 2 decades ago, I think a lot of what propelled us was this idea that we'd found an opportunity to do something good, right? I wanted to work in this sector in some way. I wasn't sure what that was, but I kind of thought that maybe it was doing something entrepreneurial that fit my personality better. And when I saw that there was this apparent inefficiency, that the way the sector worked was kind of antiquated, that the way you got a job was by knowing people instead of going to some kind of online resource, or the way that you found funding was by having a history of working with the same funders, but new organizations had a hard time breaking in and getting new funding. The way that there really was no news in our space. There was no journalism you could turn to tell you what's working, what's not working. All those things are part of why we got going. So we were just, some fortunately slightly ignorant younger people in graduate school studying these issues and seeing a problem and saying, maybe we can address it. And so, I started out with my colleagues by just talking to as many people as I could in this space and hearing from them. What are some of the pain points, the things that they're struggling with and frustrated with? And it's amazing how a lot of them are still pretty similar. They resonate to the same issues now. I met with a number of heads of NGOs at the time who said, we know we should be hiring more professionals in the countries where we're working, but we have a hard time finding them. And I thought, wow, it's still 20 years later, we're still talking about a lot of the same issues, about localization, to use that phrase. So that's why we started. We wanted to just break open this sector, to make it transparent, to put the information online, to put up a welcome sign to anyone who wanted to be part of the development sector. And I think in many ways we succeeded. We have over 1 million members now around the world. And we really have cast kind of a wide net to anyone who's working on these issues to say, you're welcome, you're part of this development community. And I think it's really expanded a lot as a result beyond UNICEF and USAID. It now includes the private sector, social entrepreneurs, local and small NGOs. It includes government agencies and think tanks and institutes in a way that 22 years ago was a much smaller space. And so that was really our vision, I think, what drove us to do this. I ended up dropping out of graduate school. I started this as a grad student, and my dean convinced me that, he said, well, why did you come here anyway? To do something like this, right? You can always come back. And so I ended up dropping out to get this thing going. And it was based in my apartment for years. And myself and some close friends, we just really bootstrapped it with minimal funding. We got it up and running, and it took a long time, but we finally got some real traction, and it started to grow and grow from there.
Great. So what we learned from this story is that let's just get it started and keep reinventing ourselves and re-innovate along the way. Inspiring, great story there. So as co-founder of Devex, how has your understanding of personal branding been useful in your professional journey?
I guess I'd say, there's a lot of talk in branding in general about authenticity. And so I would start there. It's really important to make sure whatever you're thinking about around personal branding is authentic to who you are, and not try to be someone you're not, So I think the main thing is just to figure out, what is your story? What is your journey like, as we've been discussing? And how can you better present that to the world? And I think people are really attracted to stories. That's what they want to hear. So thinking about, your story, and think, you, Brighton, and everyone who's a fellow within this Atlas Core group, everybody has a personal story. And having met many of you, I know they tend to be very compelling personal stories. So just think about how you can better share those. And, the word personal branding might feel a little bit intimidating. I don't know that you have to think of it in that way. I would think of it just like, how do you tell the story of who you are, what you care about, what you're working on, and put it out there. And I think what you'll find as you do that, good things come from it, as long as it's really an authentic story.
Awesome. So just to recap the issues of authenticity, be authentic and tell your story. The power of storytelling is really important in branding ourselves. Thank you for that. And then what do you believe contributed to the success of Devex like over the years?
I guess a number of things did. One is the people inside Devex. We call them Devexers, and we've got a really strong culture. And our culture is really one of a startup, even though we've been around a while now. We think of ourselves as, a small team that's going to hustle to get things done. We're very entrepreneurial. And I think that culture has been really, really important because it hasn't been easy. There are many stumbling blocks along the way. And especially being in the news business, doing journalism is not easy. Finding that inner grit to just keep going and figure out when things aren't working, not to just get down on yourself, but figure out what else do we have to do? How do we pivot? How do we move? I think that part of our culture and the team, the incredible team of Devexters that we have around the world, we're now 160 people or so. That group is really, I think, the main secret sauce for how we've gotten to where we are. Maybe the other things that are critical are focus. And when you're starting out, especially when you're, starting something new, in a way, the world is your oyster. You can do anything you want. And in a sense, that can be a little bit paralyzing. You can do anything. So maybe you do nothing. Or because you can do anything, you end up doing a little bit over here and a little bit over there. And, you try to do lots of things. There's lots of shiny objects to go chase. And I think one of the things that we've done at Devex that has been successful is to stay really focused. So if you look at our business plan from 22 years ago and our business plan now, they're really similar in a lot of ways. I mean, certainly they've evolved, things have shifted, but a lot of the problems we're chasing are the very same ones. And a lot of what we're trying to do are the very same things. So we're just trying to do them a little bit better every year, a little bit more deeply every year, but it's the same focus. And focus is really critical when you're trying to do something new and innovative, I think. So that's a second, I think, maybe secret to our success. If there's a secret, stay focused. And that's why it's so important, by the way, that you understand your why and you're passionate. Some entrepreneurs will start something and they're not that passionate about the issue or the theme, and so they don't have the staying power to see it all the way through. And sometimes it takes a couple of decades before you can start to see the kind of impact you want to have, especially as a social entrepreneur.
Oh, great. So, having learned these lessons, what do you think most people get wrong about establishing a personal brand? This is really important as we have social change leaders that are connected across the world.
Probably the authenticity question, making sure what you're talking about is really coming from who you are, and maybe thinking that the thing you're working on or are focused on is just so small and narrow, no one's interested in it. So I'm going to go and I'm going to comment on the news of the day or something. And that'll be the way I put myself out there. I would go back to what you really know. The more narrow, the better. The more small scale, the better in a way. And what you'll find, I think, is there is an audience for that. There are people who are interested in the thing you're working on. And to talk about that. And those are the things you know best and are likely to be most authentic about. And, you might only find a small group of people that are really attracted to that, but that's the core group that will then help propel your personal brand. So it isn't about, reading what's in the newspaper that day, the headline everyone's talking about, and I have to have a take on that. It's more about telling your own story, giving people some insight into what you know. And what you know might feel unimportant to you or might feel too small or too narrow. It is important. It does matter. It is interesting. And just be confident in that and push it out.
Great. Issue of confidence, the more narrow, the better. Issue of staying focused. So how can social change leaders around the world listening right now leverage personal branding, to take their careers to the next level?
Well, I guess it's probably through using the platforms that are so ubiquitous now, all the social media platforms that let you very directly connect with communities and leaders around the world in the way that was impossible 20 years ago. So I think that's why this issue of personal branding is so relevant and something you're interested in and focused on, is because for Atlas Core Fellows who are thinking of like, all right, how do I make the leap from whatever role I'm in now to the next element, the next place in my career? Well, the key people that are going to help you do that might not live near where you live. You might not know them. You might not have gone to school with them. How do you get in front of them? And so I think that's where social media has really changed the game. You can, and having a personal brand can help to get there. So I think that's what it's really about. It's again, I wouldn't focus too much on your personal brand. I focus more on the substance of what you're trying to put out. Because if you're talking about something interesting and relevant, something you've seen or experienced or know, the right people are going to see that and be interested in it. And that's going to spark an interest in you. And that's the kind of thing that will help propel you to the next level of your career, I think.
Yeah, focusing on substance, really great there. So we all know that from the story that you are telling us, that personal branding has a lot to do with consistency, as you have done over the years. How can social change leaders remain consistent even when there might be limitations related to access to networks or resources?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to suggest it's easy. It's not. You know, there's a reason why, if you look at the social change sector, you know, plenty of people end up leaving it, or others get burned out. There are some success stories we talk a lot about, but there are plenty of failures. You know, that's the reality of the space. It's not easy, but people get into it and they do it because it's important work and it's what motivates them. So, you know, you shouldn't be discouraged by the fact that it's hard. That is just how it is. It is hard. But things are better in many ways than they used to be. I mean, there are many more sources of information. Devex is one good example where you can much better tap into information about, okay, who are the players in this sector? What are they doing? You know, we have a database of organizations at Devex that has tens of thousands of organizations in it that work in global development around the world. And it's free. You can go in there and search through it and find information about who's doing what in our sector. And that's the kind of thing that wasn't so easily available 20 years ago. There's now many more networks of social entrepreneurs. There's this Catalyst 2030 group. There's, of course, groups like Echoing Green. There's groups like Atlas Core. You know, there's a much richer segment of social entrepreneurs, Ashoka, I mean, so many more, Skoll Foundation, where there are places to tap in, Schwab Foundation. So I just feel like there's much more you can do now. It's in many ways, much easier than it was 20 years ago, but it's still really hard. And so what you need to do when you have limited resources, you don't have the networks, is you've got to do with what you have. You know, use what you've got, use the social media tools, find those platforms that exist, the organizations I just mentioned, try to get connected to them, and use those resources that do exist. Look at kind of the glass half full and know it's going to be a hard journey, but people can get there. People are getting there all the time. There's just tremendous impact being made around the world by social entrepreneurs.
Awesome. Hope social change leaders connected are taking notes. So just as a follow-up to that question, you know, Devex provides insider reporting to global development professionals. What are some trends in the global development sector right now that our Atlas Core network should be aware of? And also, how do you see the global development sector changing in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, there's a lot of big themes and trends going on. So maybe I'll talk about some of the really big ones, and then we can talk about some of the smaller, more immediate ones. But the really big one, I think, is a shift from what I would call a wholesale industry to a retail industry. So global development was for a long time a wholesale industry. You're from Zimbabwe, and there would be maybe meetings in Washington, D.C. in a conference room at USAID talking about Zimbabwe. Okay, here's what we're going to do. And they would be looking at a map of the country, and they would be thinking about, you know, 5 million people here and how we're going to go serve this population. And everything is very large scale. And the faces of the people, the names of the people, it's so distant that nobody's really even bothering to ask those kinds of questions or say, well, what do the people actually live in that village want? That's too narrow. That's too small. We have to think really big. And that was the reality of kind of the way the aid industry was structured. Bigger projects governed and designed from a distance. And where we're moving now increasingly because of technology and also because of a drive for better results is toward what I call retail aid, where you don't have to think about huge countries and huge regions and provinces. You can actually go and ask one individual person, what is it that you need? What is it that you want? What are the resources that are needed to keep from holding you back? And that shift is a really fundamental shift in our sector. And it's happening. We're not all the way there by any means, but we're starting to move from a very project-oriented sector. Everything we work on is a project. This one's funded by USAID, this one by the British government, FCDO, this one by a UN agency or a foundation. It has a 2 to 3 year timeline. It has certain milestones and a budget. And we kind of figured out what the problem was at the beginning, and we thought we have a solution, and we're going to just do our work and try to solve that issue in that project. That's really starting to move away, and we're starting to move more toward a very different dynamic where we're thinking about the customer. We're thinking of, let's say, a refugee, and asking that person as a customer, okay, what do you need? So, you have certain assets, you have certain skills, maybe you need work, maybe you need housing. What's the best way to deliver it to you? Is it cash transfers? Maybe your issue is getting into a work training program. Maybe it's education, but really talking to that person and seeing them as a person. It's a big shift, and it's a business model shift, and it's a mental model shift, because our industry has long been in some kind of colonial roots, thinking about people as beneficiaries and a very top-down approach, maybe with good intentions, very good intentions often, but still very top-down. As though we know better, those at the top know better than the people on the ground. And that is starting to shift with this move to retail aid. And so more and more business models that say like direct cash transfers, or thinking about how you can empower a farmer with new technology instead of thinking about bringing food aid from overseas, right? Those kinds of mental model shifts and business model shifts, that's one of the biggest overarching changes that I see in our sector. And then some of the maybe smaller ones that are within that are things like localization that we talk a lot about. This idea, how do we move more funding and more decision-making and power from the global north to the global south? That's really important. I think it's kind of smaller because ultimately this business model shift to retail aid is what will ultimately actually do this. Because it's very hard for people to really give up power and money and control and authority. That's very slow going. But I think the business model shift, the drive for results, is going to move us much faster. And that is the overarching trend in our sector.
Thank you, Raj, for those what I call insider insights. We are taking notes, definitely. So at this point, to our audience connected throughout the world, our social change leaders, you can write questions in the chat that you need to ask Raj before we end this session, as we continue. So Raj, this week our fellows are also learning about and practicing their networking skills this week through our theme, Developing Self. How has networking affected your career, or even if you can tell us a time where your network helped you in your journey?
I mean, I guess I would say networking is absolutely essential, and it helps you and helps me every day, and has helped me throughout my career, and I still do it all the time. I guess I don't think about it as networking. That's maybe a subtle thing, but I think when you think about it as networking, you think of it as like this other person that you're talking to is more like a tool, a step for you to go forward in your career. And no one likes to be thought of as a tool or a step. People want to have a real relationship. So I guess I don't think about it as networking. I think about it as just, I enjoy meeting people, and I enjoy talking to people, whatever role they have, whatever level they're at, and hearing their story and connecting with them. And I think if you enjoy that, you end up doing a lot of it. And then, things connect. At some point, you have a need for, I say, oh, I know Brighton, and Brighton's interested in this, and I meet someone else who needs to meet someone like you, and I connect you. And then maybe one day you call me with some opportunity, right? So I think if you think of it as networking as something like, I have to do it, I hate networking, and I have to do my networking today, It will come across that way probably, and my guess is you won't be very successful at it. But if you enjoy meeting people, and if you enjoy learning about others, and if you treat other people with a lot of respect, and you're interested in them, whatever their job is, maybe they're an intern, they don't have to be the CEO, right? Whoever they are, talk to them and build a relationship. And that's what networking is, in my opinion. And sure, you could be very strategic if there's certain institutions or sectors or countries you're trying to kind of break into and know more people. Sure, you can target your efforts, attend the right conferences or meetings, but in general, you should be doing it out of a love for doing it and a love for meeting others and hearing their stories.
Awesome. So as we wrap up this session, you wrote a book titled "The Business of Changing the World." And in the book, you talk about the aid industry and seeking results in global development and the elimination of extreme poverty. Many have set their life's work on putting an end to extreme poverty. What have they gotten wrong, and what does it look like to get it right?
Yeah, it's not going to be easy to get that right. I mean, in some ways, ending extreme poverty sounds sort of technical, right? There's a certain number of people who are under a certain, $2.10 a day, according to the World Bank. And, so if we could just get money to them or food to them, we could get the extreme poverty levels down. It sort of sounds like a technical matter in a way. And I think the first insight that I talk quite a bit about in my book is there are technical aspects to this problem, but it's mostly a problem of human rights. It's mostly a problem of justice and injustice, right? Who is really poor in the world? It's people who are marginalized, people who are pushed down, pushed out of society. So if you don't acknowledge the justice issues at the core of this, it becomes really hard to solve it as just a pure technical matter, right? And so there's some great technical interventions. Cash transfers are one, really big one that's on the upswing now and very exciting. But alone, that's not going to do it. So I guess the first insight is, look, we live in a world that's not just, it's not fair. And unless you do something to try to change that, then you're not going to get out of this circumstance. And wherever you set the bar of $2.10, it was $1.90. These are arbitrary levels. So what matters really is, okay, yes, let's do the technical things right. Let's deliver food aid where needed, or let's deliver medical services where needed. But let's also pull back and look at the world and say, how do we make the world a little more just? How do we think about one global health system, right? So that there isn't really weak health systems in one place, really strong in somewhere else, and pandemics are spreading as a result of that. Let's actually say, no, there's some minimum level of a health system anywhere in the world that everyone should have access to, and build those up. So I think you start with a conception around why there's extreme poverty, what this injustice is all about. And when you start from there, then yes, layer in the best technical expertise, the best ideas, but you need to start with the right base to have that discussion. And now that we have a climate crisis upon us, we know who that's going to hurt the worst. It's going to hurt the people who are most marginalized, the people who are pushed out of society the most. They're living in the places that are most at risk for rising seas or floodwaters, right? Or at least access to sustainable health or education services and energy. And so we know these problems are going to get worse unless you start by that conception of understanding why the world is the way it is, and then start to use all of the great resources and technology and skill we have as a world to get there. And we have those in abundance. The world is more than wealthy enough, far more than wealthy enough, to feed everyone, to house everyone, to have everyone not live in poverty. So, and lots of people are committed to that, including this group. So how do we take those insights and then start to really use our career to push this forward? That's what I would leave you with, I guess.
Oh, awesome. So I was just monitoring our chats, and we have a question from Zunaira from Pakistan. And the question is, Raj, having worked in the startup ecosystem, they're saying that they often come across this statement that investors invest in the founder, and their story more than the venture. So how do you feel about that, and what has personal branding highlighted for you?
Yeah, that's very true. It depends somewhat on the type of startup. So if it's, let's say, a technology startup and you have a core resource, a patent or a piece of technology that's unique maybe they're really going to invest in that because they're so convinced by the product, something you built that's tangible and they can assess. But for most startups, you really don't have that yet, right? And you're looking for funding because you want to build that. What you mainly have is an idea. And when you're looking for like seed stage funding, you're starting with mostly an idea. You might have had some traction, you might have built a basic product, but in that case, if you're an investor, so much of the success of that business is going to be, who are those founders? Do they have the tenacity to find a way to make it work no matter what? They might have to pivot 3 times before they find that kind of product market fit for what they're trying to do. So you need to really invest in that founder. It's really true. And so I think investors are trying to find those founders and try to assess them. And so you as a founder or someone involved in startups, you got to just present yourself. You got to make sure people can know who you are and present yourself in the best possible way, that they're going to see that you have those core skills. Again, not just hard technical skills, but soft skills like tenacity and people skills, that you can attract a great team to work with you. Those skills are going to be absolutely critical because, yes, people will invest in founders.
Thank you, Raj, and I hope, Sunaira, you have taken those nuggets from Raj. And our second question is from Bijan, the CEO of Atlas Core. So knowing us so well and having been there from the start when Scott founded the organization, what would be your advice to us as Atlas Core to strengthen and focus our organizational brand on talent and potential, particularly given your earlier comments on localization?
Yeah, I think, like I was saying at the beginning, sometimes a really good idea takes a couple of decades before you can get to the full impact that you're trying to achieve. And I think Atlas Core's best asset is that it has been working on this same problem for so many years. That's a good thing. So I wouldn't think about pivoting the brand or changing something radically. I think it's about connecting the core of what Atlas Core is doing and has done, which is so impressive, and the people who've come through this group, the alumni, connecting that to these broader questions around the SDGs and around the climate crisis, connecting and showing people how the work Atlas Core is doing every day is actually driving the same kinds of impacts that people want to see. And that's not easy, but I think that's the direction to go, instead of saying, well, what's the latest trend and how do I kind of pivot our brand to look like we're part of that latest trend? I would keep doing what you're doing. It's having great impact in the world. But just tell the story a little more about how it's having that impact and connect it to some of these bigger themes. And I think the more you do that, the more people will stand up and recognize the work you're doing and support it.
Thank you for that, Raj. I think from our discussion today, we learned the power of storytelling, telling your story. So as we wrap up this session, if you were to give us one piece of advice, to all the rising social change leaders watching us right now, what would it be?
I guess it would be stick to it, stay at it. This is, again, maybe the theme that's come out of our conversation today, Brighton, but you're making me reflect a lot on Devex and how we got started. And I'm thinking about Atlas Core and how it got started. And so many of the things that are really working today in global development that are so impactful. I just mentioned a number of the social entrepreneur organizations, the Schwab Foundation and Skoll and Echoing Green and all these groups. So many of them, they were what I call an overnight success that took 20 years. And that's kind of what we need to realize, is you're not going to have that kind of real social impact in a year or two. It takes some time. So stick to it. That's my main piece of advice. If you found the thing you're passionate about, if you're working in the sector you want to work in, maybe you want to have more impact tomorrow. That's good. Keep that ambition, but stick to it. And that determination, that grit, that perseverance, that's the thing that's most likely to create real, lasting, sustainable change for people around the world. It's sticking to it. So that's my last piece of advice.
Thank you so much, Raj. I've also learned a lot from this session. You know, the power of telling your story, authenticity in building your brand, consistency, keeping your focus. I really hope that during this session, Social Change Leaders Connected, you have been inspired to do your work from a different level and from a different perspective. Thank you so much for joining us today for another leadership journey session of the Atlas Core Global Leadership Lab. Also, make sure to follow us on Facebook and YouTube for more engaging content like this. Visit our website, atlascore.org/programs, to learn about ongoing recruitment for Atlas Core programs. My name is Brighton, and our guest today was Raj Kumar, the co-founder and CEO at Devex. Thank you so much and have a great day. Thank you, Raj.
Great being with all of you. Thank you, Brighton.
All right. Bye-bye.